This is the Nursing Home Abuse Podcast, episode 107. Why do nursing homes over-medicate residents? With special guest Kelly Bagby. The Nursing Home Abuse Podcast is dedicated to providing news and information for families whose loved ones have been injured in a nursing home. Here are your hosts, Georgia attorneys Rob Schenk and Will Smith. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Rob Schenk.
And I'm Will Smith.
And we are your hosts for this episode of the Nursing Home Abuse Podcast. As this podcast goes to air, it's February 25th. And generally, we like to, at some point in the podcast, talk about something topical. Usually it's a holiday or like one of those special days. We try to find something nutty to talk about.
Right. Okay.
In terms of the special days.
Well, I don't know why you would use nut as a segue into the special day, because the special day is Pistachio Day. I don't know that pistachios are nuts.
So that's a good point. I guess it would be more difficult to say that, sometimes we get really legumey with the days that we pick. Is that right? Is pistachio a legume?
I don't know. A
pistachio is a nut.
I have no idea.
It's in a shell.
I don't know that that's how that works.
I love pistachios.
You do. And anytime that we go on a road trip, which we frequently have to drive all over the state to see clients, Rob will make sure that he brings a bag of unshelled pistachios so that he has something to constantly make a mess with.
I mean, I don't know why you're complaining about that. You love pistachios, and the one time that I bought that gallon-size container that had unshelled pistachios, it was like you hit the numbers. Like you were so excited, and you just downed it.
You mean shelled pistachios?
Unshelled. Like they've had the shell removed from them.
Oh,
Are you saying that by saying shelled pistachios, they don't have shells?
Right, because shelled is not a verb. It's a noun. It's that their shells have been removed. So they've been shelled. Just like, no,
sir.
It's not like shucking an oyster. Like shuck is the verb.
Oysters don't have shucks.
Right. That's why I'm saying. But I feel like if you shell a pistachio, you remove its shell.
I guess a better analogy would be pitted dates.
Mm-hmm.
So a pitted date is one that still has the pit in it. No,
I don't think so. I think a pitted date would be one that had the pit removed.
Gene, we're going to have to get
we'll have to come back on this one. Yeah.
Well, that's enough nonsense.
Okay.
We need to get into what we're talking about today. So
yeah.
The topic for today is the problem with over-medicating nursing home residents, and that happens for a variety of reasons in our experience. But to delve deeper into this topic, we are going to need some help. We have a special guest. Her name is Kelly Bagby, and I saw Kelly Bagby speak, actually, like many of our guests, at the National Consumer Voice Conference in 2018. Maybe we'll see her again later this year. But at any rate, Will, who is Kelly Bagby, and what's she about?
She's the vice president at AARP Foundation Litigation, AFL, managing the office's work related to health, hunger, housing, and human services. Kelly specializes in civil rights, disability rights, health law, and other public interest areas with an emphasis on litigation. She has been part of AFL's health team since 2008. She has litigated a range of discrimination and public interest cases in both federal and state courts. Prior to joining the litigation branch of the AARP, she worked for the Office of Counsel for the Office of Inspector General, OIG, for the United States Department of Health and Human Services. From 1998 to 2004, Kelly was the litigation director at Disability Rights DC and worked at Disability Rights Maryland before that. So we're dealing with an attorney here today who has a wide range of experiences in both federal and state courts and dealing with topics related to the care for the elderly. So we are very lucky to have Miss Bagby here today.
Miss Bagby, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, great. Well, Kelly, Will and I were just talking about how over-medication of residents, nursing home residents, particularly in the state of Georgia, is a growing problem. So we're really happy that you've been able to come on to the program to talk about this issue. I guess one of the main things we want to get out of the way first is like in terms of over-medication. What are some of the more commonly overprescribed medicines that you've seen in your experience?
Yeah, so actually, if you don't mind, I'm gonna push back on the term over medication because
Sure.
I think some of these medications should never be administered to certain people.
Okay.
And so there's no small amount of the medication that would be appropriate for them, particularly for people with dementia. Giving people with dementia certain kinds of what are known as antipsychotic drugs like Risperdal or Geodon or Abilify. Those drugs are not intended to treat dementia and in fact can't treat dementia. Those drugs carry FDA's most dire warning, which is known as a black box warning.
Mm-hmm.
It's named because it has a big old black box around the manufacturer's box. And it's the highest warning that the FDA requires. And that warning says these drugs can cause death when given to people with dementia. And so no small amount is going to be appropriate in those circumstances. So it's not so much about the over-prescription of these drugs. It's any prescription of these drugs for people with certain kinds of conditions can be fatal. So then on top of the drugs I just mentioned, Risperdal, Geodon, Abilify, there's a long list. You go to the FDA's webpage and Google black box warning drugs. You can get the list of the name brands as well as generic brands, so families can look up and see, well, is this a drug that has a black box warning? On top of that, there's another category of drugs, usually given for seizures, drugs like Depakote, and those drugs are also commonly used are administered with people with dementia in nursing facilities. But all these drugs are given not to treat an illness when dementia is present. They're there basically to chemically restrain the residents and to prevent them from having what might be normal behaviors for a person with dementia.
Right. So there's an effect that we were talking about this another 2 podcasts ago. When I was working in a nursing home, they were using haloperidol a lot. Then they started going to Risperdal and Seroquel, and it basically, I don't know if sedate is the correct medical term, but it makes them more compliable. It's a convenience for the staff because you may have somebody like Mr. Johnson has dementia and he keeps going into other people's rooms. And so they kind of come up with a reason to give him these drugs, but he doesn't need it at all. He doesn't have schizophrenia. There's something else that needs to be done.
That's right. And so you're talking about the sedative benefits, or from their perspective, from the staff's perspective.
Right, benefits, yeah.
But they are, and so that's basically, control of the resident for staff convenience. And rather than having adequate staffing to redirect Mr. Johnson to doing, things that are maybe a distraction to him rather than sedating him. But the really dangerous part of these drugs is that with some people, the impact can be within weeks, that they begin to be unable to eat or drink, and they start deteriorating. They start slumping in their chair. Their breathing becomes labored. They lose all interest. My clients have lost the ability to communicate and sit up, and then they, become at risk of aspirating food into their lungs. And so and this can happen for my clients anyway, happen within weeks of being administered the first prescription of these drugs. It can happen very, very quickly especially when you're talking about a vulnerable person, who has other medical complications. The impact of the drugs is very swift with some people and irreversible.
Irreversible. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, and it sounds like they're being used for, it's just, and I say this as somebody who worked in a nursing home. I'm not saying this about all people who work in nursing homes, but it's because of staff laziness. It's easier to have a sedated Mr. Johnson than it is, to figure out why he may be going into other rooms or figuring out a different way of dealing with him.
That's right.
And it's a shame. Yeah.
There was a client that we had, we built a class action around one facility in California. And that one client was, was in for rehabilitation. She had broken her hip. Mm-hmm. So the only purpose of her being in the nursing home was so that she could rehab her hip after surgery. Mm-hmm. She was only in for 3 weeks. And during that time, they layered on increasing amounts of drugs. But their reasoning wasn't that she was, wandering or bothering anybody or yelling or any of those things. Their reasoning was she kept trying to get out of her wheelchair because she was uncomfortable because she had just had hip surgery. Mm-hmm. And so every time she would shift and try to get out of the chair, they would layer on another drug. And when you looked across the weeks that she was there, she went from 0 drugs for behavioral intervention to 11 drugs for behavioral intervention. Mm-hmm. And she died. Her daughter realized that they were basically poisoning her with these drugs and withdrew her from the facility. But by then the damage was so advanced in her cognitive abilities and her immune system had become so depressed that when they put her back into basically an opioid kind of thing, to try to get her off all the drugs that our nursing home had put her on, and they couldn't get her off, and she passed away.
And you mentioned opioids. I mean, we all know that is a widely prescribed class of medicines in the American medical system overall, not just for the elderly. But are opioids an issue as well?
Yes, especially for people who are not necessarily in nursing facilities, but people who are living in community settings. Mm-hmm. And who are, hopefully being supported in their own, aging in place in their own homes. Sometimes if there's a fall, then they go to the emergency room and they just have, it's not even a bad fall. The doctors will give them a whole bottle of, mm-hmm. of painkillers. And unbeknownst to the person who's taking the drugs, they're becoming addicted quickly. And so that becomes a real problem for a lot of people in community settings as well.
So in addition to the chemical restraint aspect of certain drugs, what are some other reasons what are some other overprescribed medicines that we're looking at then?
Well, I think that there's a lot of use of drugs like Ativan, anti-anxiety drugs, mm-hmm. Which are sort of a temporary restraint. They're not given on a daily basis. So if somebody's feeling anxious and having worries or is acting peculiar, nursing homes will sometimes start giving them something like Ativan or Valium. But those drugs can also become a problem if not monitored, and particularly if not evaluated in conjunction with the other kinds of drugs they're taking. So looking at counterindications and how the drugs interact with each other, and how they might cause problems that older people are more susceptible to, like constipation, and which can lead to very serious side effects, dehydration, which can lead to very serious side effects, and swallowing problems, which also can lead to aspiration. So it all comes down to, you need good oversight and monitoring and people evaluating and following up with, what is happening with this person who's taking these serious medications? Are they having a normal or an abnormal reaction to them? And are we watching carefully for the way the drugs are interacting with each other? And more importantly, are there alternatives to these things? I mean, there are a lot of non-pharmacological interventions that should always be tried well before you start, asking for the pharmacy's assistance.
Well, what kind of oversight is out there? I mean, clearly individuals like yourself who are involved in litigation are doing what you can, but is there a lot of government oversight? Is there even an F tag for over medication?
There's an F tag for inappropriate medication, not for over medication.
Yeah.
But the F tag doesn't look at whether there's actual harm, which is really a problem. Because if you're giving somebody medication that isn't, if I just handed you a bunch of pills that you don't need right now, you would assume that's actual harm for you, right? I mean, that's normal. That's how we would normally evaluate somebody handing me a bunch of drugs that I don't need to take. But in a nursing facility, there's no such presumption that giving somebody drugs that are not appropriate for them medically is harmful, and that is a serious deficiency, I think, in our system.
And I want to correct myself on this too. I keep saying over medication, but you've made the point, and it's a very good one, that it isn't really a matter of over medication.
Only in some instances. Some instances it's inappropriate.
It's totally inappropriate that somebody who's going in for a 3-week rehab be given, medicine for a schizophrenic just because it prevents her from getting out of her wheelchair. There's no amount that she should be getting. Yeah.
If you think about it, if your kids went to school one day and the teacher called you at the end of the day and said, yeah, so Mary was having some problems in school and she was disrupting the class. So in order to make my job easier, I gave her some Haldol.
Right.
That's mad and uncontrolled behavior. Like, why would any, but when you do it with a child, we are appropriately horrified, but we should be also appropriately horrified when it happens to an older person in a nursing facility.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Go ahead, Rob.
Kelly, you had mentioned earlier that from the nursing home standpoint, and I'm putting benefits in air quotes, but one of the benefits of inappropriate medication for residents is basically controlling their behavior. That seems to suggest that maybe there's some other quote unquote benefits to inappropriate medication. Maybe, for example, preventing wandering, or something, preventing falls. Like, what are some other reasons why you're seeing inappropriate medication?
Yeah, and it could even be I know that in the world of mainstream medicine and the opioid crisis, that there's a lot of complaints that big pharma is involved and maybe pushing hydrocodone, Lortab, and OxyContin, all these different drugs. Is anything like that going on in the long-term care community, or is it strictly just staff
controlling behavior?
Yeah, is staff just trying to be convenient?
Well, I don't know how much time you have. There's a long history of off-label promotion of these drugs in nursing facilities, and there's been criminal prosecutions by the federal government. There have been False Claims Act settlements to address, in the billions of dollars, to address the way that the pharmacological manufacturers have pushed these drugs through kickback schemes and various and sundry ways, have just gotten this to be an acceptable culture where drugs are your first line of defense if you see a behavior. And that takes re-education, I think, of doctors. It takes increased staffing in nursing facilities so that if you have enough staff to redirect a person who's exhibiting, wandering behaviors or whatever, all the staff has to do is say, Mary, you don't want to walk out that door. Look over here. Let's go play. Let's go do something over here. Let's read this book, or look at this magazine, or let's go paint a picture. And so facilities that have shifted away from such a medical model where pills are your first idea and have put in place more activity therapists and more people who are working on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis with people in, dementia units, people with memory problems. Those facilities can they can eliminate the use of antipsychotic drugs completely, and have. But you have to make a real culture change in the way you operate your nursing facility to be able to accomplish.
Yeah, so it sounds like, I mean, like the first line of defense are, care plan meetings and putting the appropriate interventions that are specific to each resident in place.
Well, it's also interesting. We had met another individual at the National Consumer Voice Conference, Diane Carter, who's a nurse in Colorado, and she used to be with the American Association on Post-Acute Care Nursing. And she was telling us, we were talking to her about chemical restraints, and she was telling us a story about one resident who kept going into people's rooms and kept going into their drawers. And, the staff figured out a non-medical intervention, which had to do with her history as a librarian. And they set up this sort of fake Dewey Decimal System box to give
cards,
to her with cards in it. And
Yeah.
it gave her something to do. And that's what she was looking for. But it was an interesting anecdote because it shows that, there are other alternatives, or at least there should be an attempt at other alternatives before you turn to pills.
Well, sometimes I think it also is just trying to figure out why the person's behavior is what it is. So
Exactly.
that Dr. Jonathan Evans, who was a co-panelist at the Consumer Voice with me and has been my expert in many of my cases, tells the story of one of the residents in his facility who kept pulling the fire alarm, just repeatedly pulling the fire alarm day after day. And the facility said, like, we're going to have to kick her out. Like, we can't have her pulling the fire alarm all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were in it. They all put their heads together and they're sitting down and going like, what are we going to do? Like, should we put her on meds? I really don't want to put her on meds. And so finally they look over at the fire alarm and there's a sign above it that says pull. So every time she's walking by, she's following directions. It says pull. So
Right.
she pulls it.
Right.
Wow.
But it requires some deep thought by the treatment team to go, okay, wait a minute, what's really happening here? So then they put up a sign that still says pull, but it says not you, Mildred.
Wow.
But that worked, you know?
But it does, it is, I always thought about this when I was working on the floor. I was a CNA, but the LPNs above me, I mean, what a floor nurses, at least in our environments, what their main job is passing out medicine. That's all that they have time to do. Every single resident has a myriad of different pills that they take. And it's strange that we have that mindset where it seems like we would say, well, of course they have pills to take. They're older and they're sick. That's not really the case, though. A lot of those pills are given and probably shouldn't be given. There probably are a lot of alternatives to just taking medicine all the time.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, 20% of people in the nation's nursing facilities have a diagnosis of dementia. So that's a fifth of all the people in nursing facilities for whom these drugs could be fatal.
Mm-hmm.
But so you really have to take that into context and say, all right, so that's a fifth of the people that we should be finding better choices, better alternative treatments for. And really they shouldn't be the alternatives. They should actually be the primary because drugs do not treat dementia. These are not treatments. These are 100% just chemical restraint for this population of people.
Wow. Well, Kelly, let's, again, because our audience consists of mostly family members with loved ones in nursing homes. What are some of the signs, some of the telltale signs of inappropriate medications being used as restraints that they can observe and know what's going on?
Well, the main things that my clients have described to me are that somebody just starts to seem different. They seem withdrawn, which can happen to people when they go into a nursing home because especially if they're coming from their own home and they're going to a nursing home, they can become depressed. But it's depression plus they're losing interest in everything. They don't want to talk. They don't want to eat. They're not really, they have to be reminded to drink water. Those kind of things are very beginning signs. But when they start slumping over and they are not able to, like their spine isn't really working before them, they're slumped over all the time, or they stop walking or they start shuffling or tremors. Those are very important signs to never ignore because once you get those sort of Parkinsonian symptoms where you're they're moving their hands and feet a lot, or they're having twitches in their face, then those are warning signs, and people need to heed those carefully.
And Kelly, can you kind of walk us through what the AARP Foundation Litigation Department does on a daily or a yearly basis? Like, what kind of cases are you guys taking? Who are your typical defendants? Who are your typical clients?
So we bring cases. We bring a host of cases. We're basically like a small law firm housed within AARP Foundation. Mm-hmm. So we bring, on top of elder justice cases and elder abuse cases, we bring age discrimination cases in employment context and cases around consumer protections, and, a host of other things. But we also bring cases targeting nursing facilities who are mistreating or, potentially abusing and neglecting, our members or, people similarly situated. So we do that by sometimes we've brought wrongful death cases, sometimes we've brought class action cases, to try to address what are obviously systemic problems. Mm-hmm. And so we've done a number of cases in those areas. We also bring cases all over the country to help give meaning to the civil rights of people in nursing homes to be able to live outside of nursing homes, to try to get Medicaid to pay for long-term care services for them in community settings where they're not isolated and not feeling like they've gone to a nursing home as their last place that they're going to live, that they can live full lives with dignity in the community as well. Right. So we have a very robust practice in all those areas.
And so it seems like you're taking on a lot of more systematic claims. You say class actions, not just maybe what would be considered maybe like a one-off incident. You're talking about structural problems with these nursing facilities.
Yes, we try to pick big chains to sue so that we can hopefully push them to make, broader systems change throughout their company. But we also are bringing staffing cases because we recognize that poor staffing is one of the reasons why people are inappropriately medicating people. We also a case where a nursing facility resident was dumped into a hospital out of a nursing home, and the facility refused to accept her back even after she had won an administrative decision to be returned. So that is another systemic, like nationwide systemic problem that we're trying to tackle through litigation, and raise awareness with corporations that, the Nursing Home Reform Act means something and they can't flout the law and think that we're all going to just go along.
That's right.
Now, you guys, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the AARP is the only special interest group that has a litigation section. I know Consumer Voice doesn't, right?
No, they don't, but we do a lot of work with Consumer Voice.
Of course, yeah.
And we partner with them on things, but there's Justice and Aging is also both a policy and an advocacy as well as litigation unit.
We have Mr. Eric Carson on next week.
Oh, great.
Yeah, from the Justice and Aging. But I mean, I'm giving you guys credit, though. It's you and Justice and Aging. There's not a lot of other people out there fighting for these issues.
With legal teeth.
With legal teeth,
I don't know if that's the right analogy.
Yeah, I think that's, the other organization that doesn't just specialize in older folks is the National Health Law Project.
Okay.
They do a lot of litigation around Medicate in particular, but we've partnered with them on broad systemic litigation, particularly cases to get people out of nursing facilities.
So what does your office look like? I mean, how many attorneys are in your litigation unit? Like, I mean, how big is the operation?
I think we have about 12 attorneys, and then I'm actually one of the vice presidents, so I'm technically a manager, but I still, help with building all the litigation. So the folks that do the nursing home work is probably about 3 or 4 of us.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
And we partner. Mm-hmm. We partner with firms all over the country, though, so that's how we can, really get a broad swath, and it really helps to have AARP's name in our name, but it does help us to be able to attract good partners everywhere.
Yeah, I bet.
And Kelly, so for our audience, which is mostly Georgia-based, if they suspect that their loved one is as being inappropriately prescribed, given medicine, and it's affected their health, and they want to get in contact with the AARP litigation or AARP Foundation Litigation section, how can they reach out to you? How can they reach out to your staff?
Well, the first thing I would advise a family member that's worried is to call an emergency meeting with the treatment team at the nursing facility, because that's the number one thing they need to find out is what's going on. What medications did they give to their loved one, and how long has it been, have they been administering these, and are they monitoring for side effects, and why are they giving them? That's the first thing I would say to anybody before you go try to find legal assistance. I would also urge the family to, second, notify the state of their concerns. If they find out that their loved one was given medication without informed consent, we haven't really talked about informed consent, but that's a big thing. This is usually a surprise to a family to find out that that their loved one is getting any of these drugs. And so if that's the case, they should notify the state that they didn't authorize it, and that they don't believe that their parent or loved one authorized it, and why is this happening? And then if they decide that they do need legal assistance, they can certainly contact me at kbagby@aarp.org, and we will do what we can to. If we can't represent the family, we will assist them in finding help.
And you just mentioned something I want to touch on briefly, because we've been talking about inappropriate medicine, but just as a reminder, you don't have to take any medicine that you don't want to. I went to the doctor the other day, and they gave me something for I can't remember what it was, but as an adult, human, I have the right to go, I'm okay. I'll just do without it. Even though you're suggesting it, I'll exercise my right as a human and say no. And family members or whomever is making the decision for the resident, whether it's the resident or healthcare proxy, you have a right not to take medicine. That's
absolutely right. You need to be informed, however.
Yes.
So that the part of the problem is that, we heard examples at the Consumer Voice conference where people were having medications ground up and put into their food. Yeah. So clearly you're not going to be able to give informed consent to that because you don't even know they're doing it.
That's right.
But I think, part of the problem is we have to insist upon admission. Families need to be insisting upon admission that they want to know every single treatment that is being suggested, whether it's occupational therapy or it's a drug treatment protocol. They need to be informed, and there should be no administration of drugs without that first informed consent being provided.
And I think that Rob, I think in the future we need to use the phrase medication abuses, because it's, number one, it's not just over medication. Mm-hmm. It's also inappropriate medication, and it's medication that may be appropriate or it's prescribed, but there's no informed consent. I know for a fact that I worked in places where there were individuals that were not necessarily cognitively aware, and they would, just grind up anything, put it in the pudding, and give it to the person. And I don't know that there's any checks and balances on that going on at all. So it's a huge.
And so one of the things that we do in our cases is we make sure that we call that what it is. That's a battery. That's you doing an unlawful touch on a person. Yeah. And if somebody gives me a drug without my knowledge, that's a battery they've committed on me. Yeah. And it's the same for nursing facility residents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Well, Kelly, this has been very informative.
We'll have to have you back on at some point, because there's a lot of
stuff to talk about
that you do, and we really appreciate the work that you do out there fighting the good fight.
Thank you. You guys too.
Absolutely. We really appreciate it. But thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much,
All right.
Kelly.
Thank you both very much. Take care.
Right. You too. Bye, Kelly.
Bye-bye.
The National Consumer Voice is kind of like, you know how the professional, I don't know why I'm speaking like I'm not from this planet, like Major League Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just finding people from random places. Like the Cincinnati Reds have what's called a farm team.
Yeah.
Which would be a AAA team that they have their prospects, or maybe if they've got a guy that's injured and they just send him down. It's always
dudes that are talking about going to the show.
Exactly. Exactly right. Okay. So, and when I was a kid, growing up in Nashville, Tennessee,
mm-hmm.
we had a team that was called the Nashville Sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the Nashville Sounds for the longest time were the farm team for the Cincinnati Reds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we got, I can't remember. I think the Nashville Sounds, I think at some point Pete Rose might have played for him.
Right.
Chris Sabo, these type of early mid 80s type of pros. But anyway, the National Consumer Voice
mm-hmm.
is our guest farm team. Like we recruit from the Consumer Voice for guests. The convention. Yeah. So
because like Kelly is not she's probably a member of Consumer Voice, but AARP is its own league.
Its own thing. Yeah, you're right. I need to be more specific. The National Consumer Voice Conference is the farm.
The conference is
the farm team.
Yeah,
it's the Nashville Sounds of our guests.
Because you'll have people like Kelly from AARP, or next week we have Eric Carson, who wrote the book on long-term care advocacy,
and the week prior to that we had Dr. Caspi,
and then Diane Carter. All of these people belong to organizations that
they
are
meet.
Major hitters in their own right, but everybody converges at the conference.
Big league hitters.
Yeah, big league
hitters.
And it's amazing what Kelly does, and it's so important because at the end of the day, we get a lot of calls. And there are legitimate complaints, but we are not able to take those cases because our funding comes from the verdicts and the settlements that we get in these personal injury cases. So we have a very limited ability to litigate problems in the nursing home industry. It is limited to issues where the breach of standard of care has resulted in damages that can be monetized, and that ties our hands a lot. But you've got issues here where AARP is a massive special interest group that I know that its revenue is over $1 billion, all right, each year, and that's phenomenal. It's a nonprofit organization, but all that money goes towards fighting for these interests.
Fighting the good fight.
Yeah, fighting the good fight.
I was trying to think of something like fighting the good fight, fighting the good crunch. I don't know why I was going to put crunch in there. And then from crunch, I was going to go into the pistachios again. Just to make sure that you remember that we've already talked about National Pistachio Day. I did, but that's what I was going to circle back. It's a bookend.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's two pieces of the shell coming together, so to speak.
Speaking of ends to begin with, I think that this episode has come to an end. You know
what's funny? Let me bring in one more thing, because nobody's listened to this far into the podcast.
Yeah, everybody's
checked out. Right. So this is a special treat if you're still listening.
Yeah.
Is that I thought until I was probably in my mid-20s,
mm-hmm.
maybe even later, I will admit this,
mm-hmm.
that I might have been in my 30s, that the phrase, they're trying to make ends meet, was literally they're trying to make a type of meat, like beef, called ends. Like, we're going to try to we can't even afford to make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Like, we don't have the money to buy the accoutrement to cook this food called ends meat.
Yeah.
It only until, maybe 10 years ago. I'm a 40-year-old man, 41. As this goes to air, I'm 41 for a couple weeks. You're trying to make the end, two of those ends.
Yeah, meet
together.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was going to say. What?
Well, I was going to say, until about 8 years ago, I thought that spin class
mm-hmm.
was an arts and craft class that women went to. Because I would hear people say, I'm going to spin class. And I was like, man, everybody's so artsy here.
I feel like that's more of a sexist thing than making ends meet.
Well, I think that in my mind it was spin, and I remember on
like Ghost. The Ghost.
Yeah, and so I thought it was something that women would do because
Right.
men don't care about arts and craft generally.
Or the Temptation song, Papa Was a Rolling Stone. I literally, and this is true story.
Mm-hmm.
I thought when they said all he left us was alone was literally all he left us was a promissory note that's owed, like
Alone.
literally alone.
Well,
LOAN.
part of the problem is that you're from Tennessee
Mm-hmm.
and you put the wrong emphasis on everything.
Right.
Because when you describe that song, it sounds like he was a band member with Mick Jagger and Keith Richard. Papa was a Rolling Stone. It should be Papa was a Rolling Stone. There's a difference between
I see
Tennessee
what you're
and
saying.
Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Papa was a Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
Papa was a Rolling Stone.
Papa was a Rolling Stone.
This transcript is going to be amazing.
Yeah, you're welcome, Cody.
No, you're welcome, Dennis.
Dennis.
Cody is the video editor.
Okay.
Dennis Ting
Ting.
is, in fact, the person that transcribes this. Thank you, Dennis.
Wow.
Another shout out to Dennis.
This has gone over about 8 minutes.
It has. All right. So you can always listen to the podcast through iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or you can watch us if you choose to watch us. You can watch us on the YouTube channel or at our website, nursinghomeabusepodcast.com. New episodes every Monday morning. And with that, we will see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Nursing Home Abuse Podcast. Nothing said on this podcast, either by the host or the guest, should be construed as legal advice, nor is intended to create an attorney-client relationship between the host or their guest and the listener. New episodes are available every Monday on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, or on your favorite podcast app, as well as on YouTube and our website, nursinghomeabusepodcast.com. Again, that's nursinghomeabusepodcast.com. See you next time.